attempt by the state and others, the corpocracy, the fusion of state and government, or fascism, which is what a CBDC is. It's fascism on the blockchain, to survey every moment of your life and put it into a huge database and to control you accordingly with social credit scores. If they don't like what you're watching, if they don't like what you're shopping, if they don't like how you're voting, your money will suddenly disappear because you have no control. So it's a total loss of freedom. It's total enslavement. And someone like Sean Leonard, who's an artist, a fine artist, great musician, is, the artists, as we've said many times, typically are sensitive to these types of changes a little bit ahead of the population. They have their ears and their senses are open to it. And he senses, as many folks do, that this is the last stand for humanity. Bitcoin is the last stand for humanity. It's not for nothing that El Salvador, the savior, is where we made Bitcoin legal tender.
And Italy pops up through there that we're going to punish you. And these are the same people. This is the same mindset that will control those central bank digital currencies.
Right. And the same elite who have take control of all media and censor all dissenting views, they have overused various epithets over the years. Because the elites control the media, according to the elites, according to Paul Krugman, according to the New York Times, the Washington Post, everyone is a Nazi. Everyone is a fascist. Everyone is a terrorist. So then what happens is, okay, Italy elects somebody who's completely out of left field, who's not part of the mainstream. And so when these same people, the New York Times, the Washington Post, start using words like Nazi, fascist, etc., everyone's like, you've already outworn your welcome with those words. I mean, you're going to have to think. That's the thing about the New York Times and Washington Post. They're going to have to think for the first time in 50 years about what they're saying because the population is not happy and they have the wherewithal to eliminate them.
Currency administered by a massive central government is one of the most dangerous developments in history. Finance must be decoupled from the state and decentralized. When the state can turn off your ability to transact with a switch, it controls your whole existence. And so this isn't just theoretical. What Justin Amash was responding to was an actual tweet from the White House. And the White House tweeted this: "A digital dollar may seem far-fetched," they wrote, "but it is not beyond the realm of possibility." Today, the Biden-Harris administration published policy objectives and a technical analysis for a potential U.S. central bank digital currency.
Well, that's why I've always said that Bitcoin is the nonviolent form of the guillotine. In other words, right before a major revolution, the elites got a little too uppity and they had to be dealt with. Now, Bitcoin is nonviolent. Bitcoin simply replaces the tool of their terrorism, fiat money, for freedom and individual sovereignty. And so we can look forward to something similar historically. All the wheels of history tend to turn similarly every cycle, and that's what we have to look forward to next. And now we have Bitcoin.
That had mentioned that all your models are broken, but the problem for these academics and these think tanks and the mainstream media and the unelected officials that run many of the global institutions is that they still operate in the model mindset. They have these inputs and the price is supposed to be something and they're supposed to always rule the world. But the cycles are the things that keep on continuing. The life cycle of a fiat currency, the life cycle of an empire, the Thucydides trap, the life cycle of generations, the fourth turning. We have all these cycles that are continuing and they always happen and there's an inevitability to it. But Bitcoin destroyed all the models whereby these elite manage and control that world for all those cycles, like for many successive cycles. But because their models are now destroyed, their ability to control is also destroyed.
That's right. Bitcoin is driving them insane. So instead of beheading them, Bitcoin simply turns them into dribbling psychotic, like the president of the United States, who appears to have no cognitive ability at all, thanks to Bitcoin. This author of the new, fabulous, instant classic, Permanent Distortion. Nomi, nice to see you again.
Thanks, Max. Lovely to see you and Stacy again.
All righty. So tell us about permanent distortion. What are the signs of it?
Permanent distortion is where we are living in right now. The signs are that the central banks have effectively completely dismantled the relationship between the financial markets and the real economy. This has happened in two stages, one in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008, where we saw the QE and ZERP and everything else that happened. And we've talked about that a lot. Where that distortion that created between the markets and the real economy became permanent. Like, we're not going back. There's no old normal. There's nothing we're returning to. Was in the wake of the COVID pandemic in 2020, when the Federal Reserve just basically went on turbo crazy boost and doubled the size of its book in effectively 10 minutes, or certainly way faster than it had done in the aftermath of the financial crisis, to nearly $9 trillion. Other central banks around the world followed suit. And the market was airlifted almost instantaneously, whereas the real economy was not. And so what we learned from that moment is that the distortion between the two, whether the Fed raises rates, cuts rates, whatever, we've got $41 trillion of money sloshing around the world that was fabricated from nowhere by central banks, still there, still underneath the markets, is there to stay. And the economy, the real economy, continues, whether the market's going up or down, to lag behind all of that on a permanent basis, in a permanent distortion world that we're living in. Well, the reason it's permanent is because there's no idea that we're getting back to anything, or that this is the new state. There's never going to be a relationship where there's an exact correlation or any form of correlation between the economy and the stock markets. Now, obviously, we've been going here for a long time. It's not like there's ever been a period where there's been no distortion, but there's always been this sort of backdrop sense, certainly by a lot of talking heads and a lot of books, etc., where somehow we're going to get back to normal. Things are going to normalize. What I'm saying here is that there is no normal. We're not normalizing. We are just in this permanent state.
Well, there's a normalization equation in the bond market. It's called the natural interest rate. And so bond markets, 10-year Treasury bond markets, have, for the most part, hovered around that 4 to 5% range, and that's called the natural rate. And for a long time, to your point, they were artificially kept cheap. This caused a lot of distortions. Now the central banks are saying, we want to get back to the normal rate. So isn't that an attempt to get back to normalization?
Well, it might be an attempt to get back to normal rates, but if we step back and look at the full entire picture, yes, central banks are saying that and doing that. I think they're doing the narrative around it that this is somehow going to impact inflation and sort of reduce the cost of food and fuel is ridiculous. But net of that, yes, they are saying that they need to fight these inflationary numbers, but it is meaningless compared to the size of the book and the size of the general help that has been injected artificially into markets over these years. And every day, we see almost new examples of why what's happening with rates, whatever it's called, trying to get back to some normal or sort of past average, as that might or might not happen, it doesn't touch the fact that all this money has been created and will continue to be created. The UK is one really excellent example of that. The minute there is an extreme crisis in the pension sector, not that hasn't been a crisis in the making for years, as rates have become so low on UK government bonds, on UK gilts, that there's not enough money coming into pension funds to make the obligations, to pay the liabilities of those pension funds to actual pensioners. That's been happening since QE. But with the current situation, where those bonds have been leveraged by pension managers in order to try and eke out just enough to try and pay some of those liabilities off. And now that those bonds are falling in value so quickly, those leveraged margin amounts need to be repaid. Central Bank, Bank of England, jumping back in and creating money. So what I mean by permanent is, again, this is the go-to situation. It's not a little bit of liquidity when we need it now and then. It's not a little bit of rejiggering of rates up and down to fight or not fight things that central banks can or cannot control. That's part of this. But it is about the fact that we have a permanent situation where there is money that can be created and remains available, that lifts markets, financial assets, in a way that does not get to and will not get to the real economy, whether those markets are going up or down.